Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into a major U.S. Supreme Court development, big implications for immigration policy. We're working from a pretty detailed AP News report here. And our goal really is to go beyond just the headlines. We want to unpack what this ruling means, what led up to it, and what questions it leaves us with for migrants, for the legal system. So, yeah, lots to connect here.
Absolutely. And what's really striking, I think, is just how fast things can change in this area. Immigration law is so complex. This dive isn't just about, the legal decision itself. It's also about the people involved, the human side of it, and that constant push and pull between executive power and the courts watching over it.
Okay, so let's unpack this decision. The core of it, as I understand it, is the Supreme Court basically gave the Trump administration the green light to restart these rapid removals of migrants, but not necessarily to their home countries. So migrants.
That's the crucial part, yes. They allowed removals to third countries, and what that does, for now anyway, is it lifts a lower court's order. That order had basically said, hold on, migrants need a chance to argue against being sent to one of these third countries, especially if they fear danger there.
Right. And the Supreme Court majority, they didn't really explain why in the order itself.
No, not in detail. It was a brief order, which is, pretty typical for what they call their emergency docket or the shadow docket. These are often quick decisions on urgent requests, sometimes without the full briefing and argument you see in regular cases.
Makes sense. But what really jumps out, and you mentioned the human side, is the dissent.
Oh, absolutely. A really strong dissent from Justice Sotomayor, and Justices Kagan and Dratton joined her. Sotomayor used some very stark language. She wrote that this decision exposes thousands to the risk of torture or death.
Wow. Torture or death.
Yes. And she didn't stop there. She basically said the government seems to think it's unconstrained by law, like it can deport anyone, anywhere, without notice. She even pointed out that the administration got this win, even though they'd apparently violated the lower court's order earlier.
That's a heavy charge. And the administration's response, quite different.
Very different. The DHS spokeswoman, Tricia McLaughlin, was quoted saying, "Fire up the deportation plane?"
Fire up the deportation plane.
Yeah, calling it a victory for the safety and security of the American people. So you see these two completely opposing frames.
It really highlights the stakes. One side sees security, the other sees potential death sentences. So why? Why are these third country deportations even a thing? Why not just send people back to their home countries?
That's a really important question. Well, immigration officials argue that sometimes it's just not feasible or not quick enough to return people directly home. Maybe there aren't diplomatic relations or the home country won't accept them back quickly, things like that. The people in this specific case, for example, were from places like Myanmar, Vietnam, Cuba, and they also had serious criminal convictions in the U.S., which adds another layer.
Okay. And the report highlighted a specific incident that really brought this to a head, didn't it? With a flight to South Sudan.
It did. It's quite a story. Officials put 8 people on a plane, destination South Sudan, but then a judge stepped in, mid-process almost, and the flight was diverted. They ended up landing at a U.S. naval base in Djibouti, Africa.
A judge had to intervene mid-flight. That sounds traumatic.
It really underscores the urgency. The lawyers for these migrants, like Trina Rail Muto from the National Immigration Litigation Alliance, were pushing hard in court. They were arguing against removal to South Sudan because of the risk of, quote, imprisonment, torture, and even death there.
In South Sudan.
Yeah.
Not exactly a stable place.
Yeah. Far from it. The report notes it's had waves of violence since independence in 2011. And apparently these migrants who were sent there back in May, they got less than 16 hours notice before being put on the plane.
16 hours?
Yeah. And then in Djibouti, the conditions weren't great either. They were reportedly housed, along with their guards, in a converted shipping container, facing pretty rough conditions.
And this isn't the only approach, right? The administration has also made deals with other countries, like Panama and Costa Rica.
Correct. Agreements to house immigrants, partly because, as we mentioned, some home countries just don't accept U.S. deportations readily. It's creating this network of third country arrangements.
Let's circle back to the lower court then. The Supreme Court's action basically stopped an order from Judge Brian Murphy in Boston. He's a Biden appointee, right?
That's correct. And Judge Murphy's original decision back in April is interesting. He didn't actually say no more deportations to third countries. Not at all. What he did say, and this is key, is that people must get a chance to argue that going to that specific third country would put them in danger. Specifically, danger of torture.
even if they'd already lost their other immigration appeals.
Exactly. Even if they'd exhausted other legal avenues. He said this specific protection, the chance to argue against torture in a third country, was still necessary. And he found that those May deportations to South Sudan, they actually violated his order. So he told immigration authorities, look, you have to let these people raise these concerns through their lawyers.
So it was a very targeted ruling about due process regarding torture risk.
Precisely. And there's another piece in the report from the same case, actually, where one of Judge Murphy's orders led to the government bringing someone back to the U.S.
Bringing someone back after deportation.
Yes. A gay Guatemalan man who'd been deported to Mexico. He said he'd been attacked there, raped, and extorted. And Judge Murphy's order resulted in him being returned to U.S. custody, apparently the first known instance of that since Trump's second term began.
That's incredible. It really shows the real-world impact these court orders can have, life or death sometimes.
Absolutely. And you have to see this current Supreme Court ruling in the larger context. It's happening amid this broader, very assertive immigration crackdown by the administration. They've talked about deporting millions.
Right. And this isn't the first time the Supreme Court has dealt with something like this recently, is it? There was another case involving Venezuelans.
Good point. Yeah, there was a situation where the administration wanted to send some Venezuelans accused of being gang members to a prison in El Salvador. A notorious one, apparently. In that case, interestingly, the Supreme Court actually hit the brakes.
They stopped those deportations. Wildly different outcome.
Well, they used a really old law, an 18th century wartime law, believe it or not. And based on that, they said migrants had to get a reasonable time to file a court challenge before being removed. So it does raise the question, what's different legally between that situation and this one involving third country removals more broadly? It's not immediately clear from the brief order.
It seems complicated. But overall, the pattern seems to be the conservative majority court siding with the administration on immigration more often than not.
Generally speaking, yes. The report mentions other instances where the court cleared the way for the administration to end temporary legal protections, affecting, nearly 1 million immigrants in total.
So this latest ruling fits into a larger pattern.
It does seem to fit a pattern, yeah. It's one of several recent wins for the administration before this court, not just on immigration, but on other parts of its agenda, too, like the ban on transgender troops or efforts to shrink the federal government. It suggests a court that's often, though not always, deferential to executive action in these contentious areas.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what's the bottom line here for you, our listener? This Supreme Court decision, essentially, it speeds up the process. It allows for quicker deportations to these third countries. The administration sees it as a win for safety. But the dissenting justices are sounding a major alarm, warning about grave dangers, torture, even death.
Right. And it really forces you to ask some hard questions. How do these policies square with international human rights law? What are the long-term consequences for the individuals involved? Think about the precedent this sets. How might it shape immigration policy down the road? And, what role should the courts play in overseeing this kind of executive power?
Definitely a lot to think about there, that balance between security and individual rights. It's right at the heart of this. We hope this dive gave you some deeper insights. Thanks for joining us.